in the worship. Wasn't it good to have some new songs? Some new songs we hadn't heard, to have some new faces. Thank you guys so much. Creating space to breathe. Space to breathe. You can take just a deep breath right now. Okay. I don't know about you, but there's a secret place that I go to when I'm really stressed and pressed to the walls. When life is just going hectic and at full speed, there's a secret place I get away to. It's France. It's in my head, but it's France. It's that place where I think, man, one day, if I could just get to this little village in France, then everything would be taken care of. It wouldn't be so complicated. They're slower slower pace over there. It's just relaxed. And all the cares of the world, the life would just invite me in, and I would have time to say yes. Maybe for you, that's retirement. You're thinking, oh, if I can just retire. Or maybe you're retired, and you're thinking, oh, if I can just get to that lake house. Or maybe it's that dream that you have that you revisit over and over. Whatever it is, it's that place where things are not so complicated. Where again, when life invites you, you can actually sit on the porch and rock, and the breeze will blow. And when people come by to say hi and talk, you actually have time. And you can take time to go and tinker around with that creative idea you had. And you can just finally catch your breath. You won't feel like you have to buy or keep a hold of stuff. You don't have to store up. You won't have to absolutely do anything, say anything, be anything, because you would finally be in the place that is you. And that would be enough. In these places in our mind, in our some days, busyness just somehow magically in our ideas just magically drifts away. And your schedule opens up and you're finally able to embrace what renews you. Maybe it's taking time with your family, time to wander, time to explore, time to cook healthy and invite your friends over and eat under the stars. That's what happens when you go to those magic places where there is no obligations and busyness. Well, I love the escape. And then you are back to reality. And in some way, shape, or form, I look at that and say, okay, well, if this is in my head, then maybe a part of it is possible. Maybe if I have that lingering, that desire, that hope, then maybe that's something God placed in there that says it can be. Maybe not fully fulfilled until we're in that heavenly place, wherever that is, but maybe a piece of it can happen. And so we do things that will hopefully make those changes in our life. I know Charles and I did that about 5-6 years ago. I've referenced this before, but we went from our big dream house to our small dream house. And I thought, oh, this is what it's going to take, because now I don't have any room to store anything. And now I don't have a big lawn to have to, Charles has to cut. I don't have a big house to clean. So now our schedules will be opened up. We can breathe finally. And then reality sets in again. And those tiny closets somehow get filled. The space that you have gets occupied. And the lawn, there's always something to do with it, isn't there? And before you know it, what was in our heads is still not turning out. It turns out that a location change doesn't change the mental or spiritual stuff that probably needs to be the part that changes to get to that state of breathing in your soul. I love how Priscilla Shirer, who's an author and teacher, writes about busyness and clutter, whether it's mind clutter or physical clutter. She says these two demons, they stalk you in the wee hours of the night. They keep you awake and uneasy. They corner you and demand more time, more money, more energy than you have to offer. They coerce you into making bargains you can't hold up on your end, and then they leave you in a heap of exhaustion, tired, overwhelmed, dilapidated. Can you relate? Yeah, whether you're retired or working hard, whether you're in America or in South America or Europe, Whether you're rich or poor, a parent or a student, a doctor or a cook, no matter what race you are, there's this universal phrase that has taken precedence in our lives. I am so busy. I am so busy. I've mentioned this before the last time we revisited this topic. This is a topic I will revisit from time to time throughout the year because we live in a culture that continually presses us forward. Acceleration. It completely has become actually an addiction. I was in a bookstore the other day, and there's a whole book on the addiction of acceleration, the addiction of speed. Not the drug, but the addiction of speed, of constantly having to do more and more, faster and harder. And so it's something that we all can relate to. And I think this is the part that if we don't keep revisiting it, pretty soon our lives and our schedules and our rhythms go back to the status quo. What we know, what we're familiar with, what seems right is to work, get it done. And we don't have time to have Sabbath rest in our lives, not just a day, but in our regular weeks. And so all of our life is affected by how busy, what our balance is. So I wonder if we have these dreams, if we have retirement, if we have mountains of money, and they don't bring us peace and contentment, then what does? If we have determination and hard work, or we put in overtime hours, or we get better organized somehow, hopefully bring relief, and it doesn't, what's the secret? How do we find regular experiences that give us breathing space that lasts in a culture that pushes action and accomplishment and doing something at all times? Well, I believe the remedy can be found in our ancient yet oh so relevant writings of Scripture. Exodus 28. You guys know the verse? Remember the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Long before cell phones, long before TVs and computers, long before all the hurried and harried presence of our culture would drown out rest and renewal, God wrote, remember. I think he wrote that because he knew we would forget. And so he says, remember, in the midst of striving and trying and grasping to get more done, to get to a better place, we would forget the place where joy and delight are born, renewed. Those sacred places, those soulful places where healing and nourishment and rest are found. He knew we would need to remember Sabbath. And so in this series, we're going to be looking at in the next 4 weeks another peek, a fresh look at Sabbath principles. Now we know Sabbath certainly as a day of the week, but I believe that God came to show us a Sabbath way of living, an attitude, a perspective, a life orientation that sets us free to breathe, a rhythm that opens us up to experience truly abundant life. And if we save that just for once a week, we're missing out on the rest of our life that God wants to touch and connect with. Harriet Tubman, who helped free thousands of slaves in America, once said, I freed thousands of slaves, it's true. I could have freed thousands more if they had known they were slaves. I could have freed thousands more if they had known they were slaves, if they only knew. Do we know how enslaving and destructive busyness and living a pressed kind of from one deadline to the next, what that does to our soul and spirit? The Chinese apparently do. They have a word for busyness. I couldn't even begin to pronounce it, but it's made of 2 characters. And the 2 characters that make up the word busyness is heart and killing. That's what their word is for busyness. Heart and killing, or another way of death, heart and death. Thomas Merton, who's a writer, a monk, a social activist, writes about the violence, it's a strong word, violence of busyness, of overwork in our lives. He writes, there is a pervasive form of contemporary violence, overwork. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone in everything, is to succumb to violence. The frenzy destroys our inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes our work fruitful. I think we've all experienced, no matter how generous or compassionate a person we may be, we've all experienced that when we're tired, when we're overwhelmed, when we've experienced that killing of the spirit, when we're overworked, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy or the capacity to be able to connect at a deeper level with those we care about. We don't have what it takes to problem solve beyond the surface or listen at a deeper level to another person, whether it's someone close to you, a stranger, your own soul, to listen to your own soul, or to God. To be able to stop and hear that still, quiet, deeper reaching voice of God that brings the peace and the wisdom and direction for our lives. What happens instead when we're tired and at our max limits, when we're confronted with a problem, what we tend to do is throw ourselves headlong into whatever solution seems to come up first. Whatever seems will do the trick to make the problem go away. We'll work harder. We'll work more hours. We'll work faster. Something, do anything. Say no to the family. Say no to fun. Say no to just taking a breather. Whatever it takes to make the problem go away. So hopefully we can finally go home and collapse and catch our breath. But we miss the whole point. That is it's actually the rest itself, the stopping, the quiet, the being still, the taking time to breathe for creativity, for relationship, time with God. This is what actually allows true wisdom and direction in our souls to rise to the surface. When we pause and we give space for our spirit and our mind to breathe, God can catch up with us and give us what's really needed. Unfortunately, when we're so full already, the quick fix is what we go after, and we fall exhausted at the end. There's a man by the name of Charles, not my husband, but another man by the name of Charles. He's a physician, very compassionate and thoughtful man, and he was sharing how exhaustion affects his work, affects his effectiveness. He was saying that physicians, of course, are trained to work when they are exhausted. You probably know this full well, don't you? When they're exhausted, required from the moment they begin medical school to perform when they're sleep deprived, when they're hurried, when they're overloaded. And so he discovered in med school that if he saw a patient when he was tired or overworked, he found that he would order a lot of tests. He was exhausted. He couldn't tell exactly what was going on, and so he could see the symptoms, but he couldn't recognize what exactly was going on. He had possible diagnoses, but he couldn't really hear how it all fit together. And so he got in the habit of ordering a battery of tests, hoping they would tell him what he was missing. But, he says, when I was rested, and if I had the opportunity to get some sleep or go for a quiet walk, when I saw the next patient, I could rely on my intuition and experience to give me a pretty accurate reading of what was happening. If there was any uncertainty about my diagnosis, I would order a single test, a specific test to confirm or deny it. But when I could take the time to listen and be present with them and their illness, I was almost always right. Sabbath. Rest. Remember the Sabbath. There are practical benefits of Sabbath spaces in our lives, our everyday lives. It replenishes the soul. It renews the mind. It gives the wisdom that we need to have in order to step forward in the most productive way. It's seemingly doing nothing. It's the stopping, pushing back the harm of busyness for the health of our spirits. Busyness and overloading kills and destroys us. Sabbath space, as a day and as a moment by moment in our weeks, is what brings healing and joy back again. I believe when God gave us Sabbath, He created Sabbath, He was thinking about knowing what our lives as human beings would be striving and grasping and going and going. And so He created Sabbath. And I use the word created because that's what He did. Sabbath wasn't just a time that God kicked back and put up His feet after He had 6 days of work. He actually created. Genesis 2:2 says, on the seventh day, God finished His work. God completed and finished His work. Abraham Heschel, who's a 20th century Jewish rabbi and author, he wrote how this has always been a puzzle. And so modern day theologians looking back at that text have concluded that ancient rabbis would have expected that if the creation took place and the work was done in 6 days, then it would have said He finished His work, completed His work in 6 days. But instead it says He finished it, He completed it on the seventh day. And so he believes that the ancient rabbis must have concluded that there was an act of creation that still took place on the seventh day. Just as heaven and earth were created in 6 days, Menuha, or rest, was created on Sabbath. After 6 days, what did the universe lack? It lacked rest. It lacked breathing space. And so the universe was not complete until He created that. Now, in this context, I look at Sabbath as a holy space for rest, a holy space created. It's not just withdrawal from something, not just taking back, withdrawing from something, but it took a special act of creation to bring it into being. And Heschel continues to write that what was created in the context and meaning of rest was tranquility. You look up these words, what that includes. Tranquility is what was created. Space for calmness and quiet, serenity, a place where you could be untroubled and peaceful, peace, freedom from disturbance, and repose, a state of relaxation. Sacred space created that if you stepped into this space, if you stepped into this place, peace and relaxation and calm would be able to be taken in, received. Rest was the capstone of creation. Without it, the universe, the world was incomplete. And when I was reading this, especially the carving out and creating space, if we wanted to create space in this room, if we wanted to create space where Gloria was sitting right now, how would we go about doing that? We'd take out some chairs, we'd move chairs, push it aside, and create space. We'd carve it out. I was remembering a trip Charles and I took to New Zealand. And Charles, I don't remember, where was it, on the coast? Where we had the hot springs, hot tubs. What was it called? It's a beach in New Zealand. We don't know the name, but it's there. And if you go, everyone goes and they bring a shovel. And the shovel, you see, okay, they're sitting on right there's the ocean and there's the sand. And you see people digging. And they're digging and they're digging. They are carving out the sand. And we forgot our shovel. And New Zealanders came to our rescue. They said, however they say it in their voice, can we carve you out a hole? Because once you dig out and take out the mud and the sand, down deep, you would get to hot water. And it would be a natural hot tub. And so as you're sitting on the beach enjoying the ocean, you're sitting in a hot tub. It was wonderful. It was beautiful. And what it took was carving out space. It took removing the mud so that you could then step in and sink down into relaxation and peace and be able to breathe. And so when I think about God creating space, I think of New Zealand and carving out so that space could be made for joy, for delight, to experience life. And what had to happen is when you push the mud aside, you had to make sure that the boundaries of this thing didn't cave back in on you. Because if it did, then you would be buried alive. And that's not very relaxing. So it's important to clear away and make sure your boundaries are firm so that you can enjoy the experience of rest, of relaxation, of joy and delight. Boundaries. Boundaries in our life. If we want to be able to experience breathing in our soul, we have to set boundaries in our life that aren't going to cave back in and bury us alive. Now, I wonder, in your own life, what needs to be cleared away? What needs to be cleared away? What boundaries need to be set in your life so that you can create and step into Sabbath space, sacred space that will allow you in your day-to-day life and living to find space for renewal, for connecting with each other, connecting with God? What needs to be set aside? Now, not every something that needs to be set aside is evil. It's not like, oh, I got to put my drugs aside. It's not all bad stuff. But somehow there are these good blessings that God gives us, whether people or things or hobbies or even indulgences like chocolate or work, jobs, ministries, dreams. All of these God gives us as gifts. But when somehow over time they get into a position in our lives that they become more controlling of us than we're in control of them, then instead of a blessing, they become kind of bondage for us. And those then that were blessings, we can't seem to figure out how to put a stop to so that we can enjoy what God has given us. And so boundaries are those things that we need so that we can enjoy the gifts of life. So God gives us these boundaries. He sets up the Sabbath, and he says, this is a blessing to you. If you don't guard, if you're not balanced, if boundaries aren't set, then the control will be changed, and you won't have control over your life, and you'll become a slave to that which controls you. Sabbath boundaries and margin reminds us to stop, to find balance again so we can fully enjoy these blessings. We set up margins, like on the page of the paper that you had. We make sure that there are boundaries set so the words don't run off the page and take over. There's a guy by the name of Brad Lemonek, who is a respected innovator and leader of the Catalyst movement in America. And he writes about margin, about the importance of having margin, space in our lives. I love this quote. He says, margin is a powerful concept. It creates opportunities. For businesses, margin is one of your top priorities because margin in business creates profit. Margin in family creates memories. Margin in our personal finances creates generosity. Margin in our friendships creates significance and impact. Margin in our lives overall creates options to pursue dreams, to think, to pray, to relax, to meditate, to process, to grow, and ultimately live life more fully. That's what margins does. That's what margins do. Our world, our culture is constantly moving and going and pressing. They don't think about margins. They don't care about your margins, the world. But God does. And he says acceleration, the keeping on going, the constant need to do more faster, that is not a lifestyle that reflects a life in step with me. One of the ways I believe that God can be revealed in us, if we want to truly reveal God's true nature, his true character, to give an accurate picture of who God is, it's yes, when we love, when we serve, when we bless others, but it's also when we stop. It's when we stop. It's when we rest, when we put up boundaries, carve out space, and keep it sacred so that we can experience joy and delight and life that God has intended for us. To think about stopping, saying no, is actually going to reveal more about who God is to others. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I love that picture of God. God practiced Sabbath principle long before he ever expected you and I to do it. God's perfect nature. He's perfect in every aspect. God is perfect. And so his rhythm, his perfect rhythm, is work and rest. It's work and joy, celebrating, delighting in life. It's work and stopping, having boundaries. And so if that's God's habit, if part of what he established from the beginning of time to show us how to live, we should not feel guilty in any way, shape, or form when we say, I'm stopping. I need to take time for joy, to celebrate with my friends, to embrace the blessings fully that he's given us, because that is after the heart of God. That is at the heart of God. All this sounds pretty good on paper, right? It sounds really good while we're sitting here in a Sabbath sacred space. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Of course. And then we go home. Now, deep inside, we know that life is not meant to be filled to the brim and overflowing. It isn't supposed to be so packed that we have no room to breathe or move. And yet it's hard. In our minds, I was with a friend the other day, and I'm walking my normal pace, and he says, why do you walk so fast? I was like, well, my mom walked fast. She was, taller, I was little, and I would literally run beside her. I would run beside my mom and be like, slow down. She's like, oh, no, come on, honey, it's good, let's go. She was a fast-moving person. Those kind of patterns and habits get ingrained in us. And that's hard to break. But there's other reasons why it's hard. We think we're the exception to the rule. Everyone else, I get it, but I can handle the stress. I can handle it. We don't think we can afford the margin. Things just won't get done the way they need to get done if I don't keep working. We don't trust God to fulfill his promise to take care of us. We play God, falsely believing that we need to provide, to finish, to do, to control, and we wonder, will he really take care of things, make them happen the way they need to by our definition, if we're not on all the time? We don't want to let others down. Whatever they're expecting, we don't want to let others down. We fear what others will think if we aren't keeping pace that they expect we should be keeping. And part of our fear is we don't know how to be still. What do you do when you have open space and time? How do you fill it? What does breathing mean? We don't know how to be content and satisfied with a slower pace of accomplishment. And it feels like it's not enough. The Israelites had the similar struggles. First time Sabbath is mentioned is in Exodus 16. It says, this is what the Lord has said, tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. And Sandra Richter, author of Epic of Eden, writes, imagine what Sabbath would mean to the Israelites, who just a few months prior had been slaves. Their only value was the quantity of labor that they were able to produce. These were slaves who, outside of a holy day or two in a whole year, worked every single day of their lives, from when they were little kids to when their bones were buried in the ground. That's how hard they worked. And now this God, who claimed to call them his treasured possession, is announcing that one day out of every 7 is supposed to be set apart just to rest. That'd be hard to get your head around as a slave. Slavery was their lifestyle. They'd known working and doing and producing and performing. They were not allowed to say no to the demands of their taskmaster. They were not in control of their choices. And yet here God is saying, it's time now. I'm giving you the freedom to truly live. What part of your lifestyle has become enslaving to you? What part do you wish you could break free from so you could breathe easier, but you're not sure how? God knew what the Israelites needed, and he knows what we need in our lives too. And so when he gave the command for Sabbath, he knew that what comes when you're used to doing things, you're used to the familiar, you have to do the discipline of freedom before you can have a life of freedom. And so he made very clear guidelines of what it means to put boundaries on so you can truly breathe and set aside time to enjoy and delight and celebrate. And he says, I need you to keep immersing yourself, sinking yourself down into this sacred space with me. And eventually you're going to learn to breathe again. You're going to learn to be free. Galatians 5:1 says, for freedom Christ has set us free. So stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. I want to end with a story by a sociologist. It's actually a research study on boundaries. Boundaries, ceasing, stopping, only going so far. They're actually gifts and not burdens to our life, those margins. And so sociologists did a study to determine the benefits and disadvantages of boundaries in our lives. And they put the experts put a group of children on a playground. And they had no railing, no fence at the edges of the playground. And they told the children, go and play, go play. And so the children found themselves playing, but they didn't quite experience the full breadth of the yard. They kept staying close by, not to the edges. It appeared that since they were uncertain of how far was too far, they opted for security and didn't explore the full range of the space. But the next experiment, the sociologist put children in a playground that was enclosed by a sturdy fence. And when the children were let loose to play this time, they explored every crevice and inch of the property, roaming the full range of their playground on all sides. They enjoyed themselves immensely. They went further and enjoyed more when they had boundaries than when they didn't. It's pretty profound. I think that God wants us to fully enjoy the blessings of life and the gifts he's given us in our family, our friends, our creativity, our serving, our relationship with him. And so he wants us to fully explore the full range of the playground of life. And so to do that, he says, they've got to set up margins to give you time to breathe, to give you time so you know, here, now, play. Yes, work, be responsible, but make sure you take time to play. Make sure you have time to experience delight and joy in life, because I did. That's my true nature, and I want you to experience that true nature too. Trusting and knowing I will take care of what's going on while you're playing. I will take care of those things while you get renewed for life. I believe that's why we meet here together as a church body, because we gather, we enjoy, we delight in each other, but it also reminds us this is a rhythm that's important for our lives. And it's why we knock down walls in this building, and we've been carving out space, because we want to be, instead of an industrial building, we want to be an inviting, sacred place of rest and renewal for our community. A Sabbath place. We're not going to call it a Sabbath place, but that's what it is. It's a place of sacred space where our community can learn to breathe again. And I think it's why we go out into our communities as one together, and in our neighborhoods, wherever God has sent us, in our places of work, in our schools, because we are Sabbath people. We are people that the way we love, the way we help, the way we come along beside, encouraging and serving, the way we seek to bless people, we are wanting to be that kind of people who carve out their hearts for others so that they can experience a more beautiful life. God says, this is how I live. This is how I want you to live. And this is why I came, to show you the way to that beautiful life. I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. We're going to be studying and exploring and finding practical ways to do this in our life. And I think the first step is to be aware. When you step out from here, the sacred space, this restful place, when you step out and go into the busy world, just pray, God, make me aware of when I need to stop and breathe with you, and he will show you the way. Let's pray. God, thank you Thank you for being a God who's not all about work, 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 hard labor, production, but you are a God that delights in breathing, that delights in playing, that delights in celebrating and delighting in joy and relationship. So many times we're trying to do the right thing, and we want to live a productive and impactful life. But God, just remind us, keep whispering and nudging us to take the time to carve out space so that we can connect with you. And you have the solutions for everything. You have the instructions that we need to make sure our life and our work and all that goes just the way it needs to go. Help us trust you in that, to trust you as we step into those sacred places of Sabbath rest. We thank you and we love you. In your name, amen. Go forth and enjoy Sabbath.